The sound of a silver spoon dinging against a crystal champagne flute usually signals a toast, a moment of love, celebration, and slightly tipsy relatives giving awkward speeches. But at my rehearsal dinner, that high-pitched ding 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 sounded more like the bell at the start of a boxing match. Or maybe a funeral toll. I stood up, smoothing the front of my charcoal Armani suit. It cost $3,000. The dress my fiancée, Sarah, was wearing, a silk slip dress in a shade of ivory that she swore was distinct from cream, cost $1,200. The venue, a private room at the most exclusive steakhouse in Chicago, was racking up a bill north of 15 grand for the night, and I paid for every single cent of it. I looked around the table, 20 of our closest friends and family. My mother was beaming, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Sarah's parents looked proud, probably relieved they were marrying off their daughter to a successful architect and not some deadbeat. And then there was Trey, my stepbrother. Best man. He was sitting to my right, leaning back in his chair, with that arrogant, lazy grin he'd perfected since we were teenagers. He had one arm draped over the back of Sarah's chair, just an inch too close. A casual observer might think it was familial affection, but I wasn't a casual observer anymore. I saw the way his fingers brushed her shoulder strap. I saw the way Sarah leaned into his touch, almost imperceptibly, her eyes glazed over with a mix of adrenaline and wine. They thought they were so slick. They thought I was just Kenji, the quiet, hard-working, reliable bank account. The guy who kept his head down through blueprints and paid the bills while they played their little games. Speech, someone yelled from the back. Probably my cousin Mike, who's already 3 martinis deep. I picked up my glass of scotch, but I didn't drink. I just held it, letting the amber liquid catch the light. "Thank you, everyone," I started, my voice steady, surprisingly steady. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands, rock solid. "It means the world to me that you're all here tonight. Truly." Sarah looked up at me, that perfect, practiced smile plastered on her face. "We love you, honey," she mouthed. I almost laughed. I almost threw up. The bile rose in my throat, hot and acidic, but I swallowed it down. I had to stick to the script, not their script, mine. "You know," I continued, pacing slightly behind my chair, "people say that a wedding isn't just about the union of 2 people. It's about the merging of families. It's about trust. It's about knowing exactly who is standing in your corner when the world falls apart." I rested my hand on Trey's shoulder. I felt him tense up underneath my grip, just a little flinch. "Take Trey here," I said, squeezing slightly harder than necessary. "My stepbrother. We didn't always get along growing up. He was the athlete, the charmer. I was the nerd with the graph paper. But Sarah insisted that he'd be my best man. She told me, 'Kenji, family is everything. You need him by your side.'" I looked down at Trey. His smile was faltering. His eyes darted to Sarah, then back to me. He sensed something. The air in the room shifted. The chatter died down completely. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC system and the clinking of silverware from the main dining room outside. "She was right," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "You really do need to know who is by your side, especially when you're planning a future, especially when you're combining finances, especially when you're booking flights for a honeymoon." Sarah's face went pale. The blood just drained right out of her. She knew. In that split second, she knew that I knew. But I wasn't done. I reached under the table and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. It wasn't the sleek leather folder containing my vows. It was ugly, utilitarian, and stuffed with paper. "I didn't get you guys traditional gifts," I announced, tossing the envelope onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud next to the centerpiece of white roses. I figured, since I paid for the wedding, the dress, the rings, and apparently Trey's bachelor trip to Vegas last month, I should get myself a little something too. "Kenji, what is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She reached for the envelope, but I slapped her hand away. Not hard, but sharp enough to make everyone gasp. Ah, I wagged a finger. "Patience, honey." We haven't even gotten to the main course. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stock of high-resolution photographs. Grainy night shots, clear daylight shots, screenshots of text messages, and bank statements highlighted in neon yellow. You see, I addressed the room, holding up a photo of Sarah and Trey. They were in a car, my car, and they definitely weren't driving. I've been working late a lot recently, big project downtown, and I guess Sarah got lonely. And Trey? Well, Trey has always been generous with his time, especially when it's on my dime. The room was dead silent. My mother looked like she was having a stroke. Sarah's father looked confused, squinting at the photo. Kenji, stop. Trey stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You're drunk. Let's go outside. Sit down, Trey, I snapped. The command whipped through the air like a lash. Unless you want me to read the text message from October 14th, where you describe exactly what you plan to do with my savings account once we got to Maui. Trey froze. He sank back into his chair, defeated. I looked at Sarah. She was crying now. Those silent, pretty tears she used to get what she wanted, but they didn't work on me anymore. The lens had shattered. I didn't see my future life. I saw a stranger, a thief. I have copies for everyone, I said, reaching back into the bag under the table and pulling out 20 smaller envelopes. I started passing them out like a blackjack dealer. One for you, Mom. One for you, Mr. Miller. One for you, Mike. People were opening them. Gasps. Murmurs. A curse word from Sarah's dad. In those envelopes, you'll find an itemized bill, I said, taking a sip of my scotch finally. It burned, glorious and cleansing. Since the wedding is off, and since the fraud you two committed is substantial, I figure we can settle this in civil court. But for tonight, I just wanted everyone to see exactly what family means to Sarah and Trey. I looked at my watch. My Uber is here. Enjoy the steak. I canceled the credit card on file for this dinner about 5 minutes ago, so, Trey, since you're the best man, maybe you can pick up the check? I turned to walk away, leaving the chaos erupting behind me. Screaming, crying, the sound of a glass shattering. It was music to my ears. But to understand how we got to this beautiful, destructive moment, I have to take you back. Back to when I was just the blind architect, building a castle for a queen who was already planning to burn it down. Let me back up. I'm an architect by trade. My entire life is built on the principles of load-bearing walls, stress points, and foundations. If you cheat on the foundation, the house collapses. It doesn't matter how expensive the chandelier in the foyer is, or how imported the Italian marble in the kitchen is. If the concrete is weak, gravity will eventually win. I should have applied that same logic to my life, but I didn't. I was too busy building the facade. I grew up in a household where good enough wasn't in the vocabulary. My father was strict, silent, and showed affection through wire transfers and report card reviews. When my parents divorced and my dad remarried, I got Trey. My stepbrother. Trey was everything I wasn't. He was loud, messy, charismatic, and completely allergic to responsibility. While I was pulling all-nighters in design school, Trey was getting kicked out of his second state college for misunderstandings involving weed and the dean's daughter. While I was securing my first junior associate position at a top Chicago firm, Trey was finding himself in Thailand on my stepmom's credit card. We tolerated each other. That's the best way to put it. I viewed him as a liability, a loose cannon that would eventually need bailing out. He viewed me as an ATM with a pulse, a boring, stiff suit who didn't know how to live. Then I met Sarah. It was 3 years ago. I was 26, freshly promoted, making 6 figures, and lonely as hell. I met her at an art gallery opening I had designed the lighting for. She was an event planner, petite blonde with a laugh that seemed to bounce off the walls and fill the empty spaces in the room. She was vibrant. She was the splash of color on my gray blueprints. I was hooked instantly. I mean, pathetic levels of hooked. I was the guy who bought her a drink before she finished the first one. I was the guy listening to her stories about her crazy family with rapt attention. Sarah made me feel interesting. That was her superpower. She looked at me, Kenji, the guy who gets excited about HVAC efficiency, and made me feel like James Bond. You're so intense, she told me on our third date. We were at a sushi place that cost more than my first car. I love how focused you are. A man with a plan. I didn't realize then that she loved the plan more than the man, specifically the financial security that came with the plan. We moved in together after 6 months. That was the first red flag I ignored. She insisted on this high-rise condo in River North, floor-to-ceiling windows, doorman, gym, the works. It was way above her budget as a freelance event planner, but she gave me those big pleading eyes. Kenji, it's an investment, she said, running her hands over the granite countertops. Imagine the networking we can do here. Imagine the life we can build. So I signed the lease. I paid the deposit. I paid the rent. Sarah bought throw pillows, expensive ones, $80 a pillow. I remember looking at the receipt and feeling a twinge of annoyance, but I shoved it down. I was the provider. That was my role. It felt good to be needed. Then Trey came back into the picture. He'd been working, bartending under the table in Miami for a year, but he needed a change of scenery, which meant he was broke and needed a place to crash. Just for a few weeks, Sarah had said, "He's your brother, Kenji. We can't leave him on the street." I remember staring at her. She barely knew Trey. They'd met maybe twice at family holidays. Why was she advocating for him? "He's not my brother," I corrected. "He's my stepbrother, and he's a disaster. Be nice." She chided, kissing me on the cheek. "He looks up to you. Maybe if he's around your success, some of it will rub off on him." God, I was an idiot. I bought it. I bought the whole supportive family narrative, hook, line, and sinker. Trey moved on to our couch. A few weeks turned into 6 months. The dynamic in the apartment shifted immediately. It wasn't just me and Sarah anymore. It was the three musketeers, or rather, 2 cool kids and the wallet. I'd come home from a 10-hour day at the firm, exhausted, tie loosened, just wanting a quiet dinner, and I'd find them in the living room. Music blasting, takeout containers everywhere, which I paid for via the Uber Eats account linked to my card. Empty bottles of wine. Kenji, Trey would yell, usually shirtless or wearing one of my gym shirts. "Dude, you gotta hear this story Sarah just told. Hilarious." Sarah would be curled up on the other end of the couch, giggling, flushed. "Hey, baby," she'd say, but she wouldn't get up. "We ordered Thai. Yours is in the fridge. Might be cold." I'd eat my cold pad thai in the kitchen island, listening to them laugh in the living room. I felt like the dad coming home to find the teenagers partying. But I told myself this was good. Sarah was getting along with my family. Isn't that what every guy wants? No friction between the wife and the in-laws. "He's so funny," Sarah told me one night in bed. Trey was asleep on the couch, or passed out. "He's got such a wild spirit. Unlike you. You're my Rocco." She made rock sound boring, stable, but static. Trey was wild. Trey was exciting. The spending started to creep up around this time. It wasn't just the rent and the bills anymore. It was emergencies. Trey's car got towed. $300. I paid it. Trey needed a suit for a job interview that he never went to. $600. I paid it. Sarah needed a new laptop because hers died right before a big client pitch. $2,000 MacBook Pro. I bought it. "We're a team," Sarah would say, hugging me when I handed over the credit card. "We help each other." But we weren't helping each other. I was helping them. The proposal happened a year ago. I went all out. I designed the ring myself. A platinum setting with a flawless 2-carat oval diamond. It cost me a significant chunk of my savings, but I wanted it to be perfect. I rented out the rooftop of the building where we had our first date. Flowers, candles, a private violinist. When I got down on one knee, Sarah cried. She said yes. She kissed me. But the first thing she did, the very first thing, was snap a photo of the ring and post it on Instagram. So lucky, so future Ms. Bling. She didn't look at me. She looked at the screen. She was checking the likes before the ring was even warm on her finger. Trey was the first one to comment. About time, bro. Welcome to the club, sis. Sis, that word should have made me happy. Instead, it made my skin crawl. There was a familiarity there that felt unearned. The wedding planning began immediately, and that's when the setup truly calcified into a trap. Sarah quit her job. She told me planning the wedding was a full-time job. I want it to be perfect, Kenji, for us, for your image. You're a rising star architect. We can't have a backyard barbecue. This needs to be a Vogue wedding. She had a point, or so I thought. My partners at the firm would be there. Clients would be there. It needed to be impressive. So I opened the floodgates. Whatever you want, babe. Just keep it under 50,000. She laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, Kenji. Cute. Try double that. I choked. 100 grand? Sarah, that's a down payment on a house. We already have a place to live. She pouted. This is once in a lifetime. Don't you love me? The ultimate weapon. Don't you love me? If I said no to the imported orchids, I didn't love her. If I said no to the live 12-piece swing band, I didn't value our future. And Trey inserted himself into the planning process like a tick burrowing into skin. I need help, Sarah claimed. You're always working. Trey has free time. He has a good eye. Trey did not have a good eye. Trey had expensive taste and zero concept of value. But suddenly, he was accompanying her to cake tastings. He was going with her to look at venues. He was driving her to dress fittings. I'd come home and find them huddled over fabric swatches on the coffee table. We decided on the velvet for the tablecloths, Trey announced one evening, holding up a swatch of midnight blue fabric. It feels way more premium than the satin. I asked, dropping my briefcase. I thought we were deciding these things. You were in a meeting, Sarah said dismissively. Trey knows what looks good. Besides, he's going to be the best man. He needs to be involved. Why is he the best man? I asked. This was a recurring argument. I have friends, Sarah, guys I went to college with, guys I actually respect, because it's about family. Sarah's voice went shrill. It sends a message of unity. Plus, he's your brother. It would break his heart if you didn't ask him. I looked at Trey. He was smirking, tossing a grape into his mouth. He didn't look like someone whose heart would be broken. He looked like the cat that ate the canary and then convinced the dog to pay for the meal. Fine, I sighed. You're the best man. Thanks, bro, Trey said, not even looking up from his phone. I'm gonna plan the sickest bachelor party. Nothing crazy. I warned. I have work. Relax, Sarah said, rubbing Trey's arm. Again, that casual touch. Let him handle it. You worry too much. That was the refrain of the last 6 months. You worry too much. You work too much. You're too uptight. Meanwhile, the bills were rolling in. The deposit for the venue, $10,000. The deposit for the florist, $8,000. The photographer, $6,000. I was hemorrhaging money. I was taking on extra freelance projects just to keep the credit card balances manageable. I was sleeping 4 hours a night. I was losing weight. And they were glowing. Sarah looked more beautiful than ever, glowing with the excitement of spending money. Trey looked healthier too, better clothes, fresh haircuts, a tan. I felt like a battery being drained to power their neon sign. There was one moment, about 2 months before the wedding, that should have made me stop everything. I came home early on a Tuesday. I had a migraine and decided to finish my work from the home office. I walked into the apartment quietly. It was midday, so I expected it to be empty. Sarah was supposed to be at a yoga retreat, which I paid for, and Trey, Well, Trey was supposed to be job hunting. The apartment was silent, but the door to the guest room, where Trey was still temporarily staying, was ajar. I walked past it towards the kitchen to get water. As I passed the door, I glanced in. They weren't in bed together. Nothing that obvious. Not yet. They were sitting on the floor, surrounded by open travel brochures. Tahiti, Bora Bora, the Maldives. Sarah was leaning over Trey's shoulder, pointing at a picture of an overwater bungalow. Her cheek was pressed against his temple. His hand was resting on her thigh. Not in a sexual groping way, but in a comfortable, possessive way, like he owned that real estate. That one, I heard Sarah whisper. That looks private. No cell service. Perfect, Trey murmured. Kenji won't be able to reach us. I froze. My heart stopped. Reach who? I asked, pushing the door open fully. They jumped apart like teenagers caught smoking. Sarah scrambled to her feet. Trey kicked the brochures under the bed. Kenji, Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her chest. You scared me. You're home early. What were you looking at? I asked, ignoring her shock. And why won't I be able to reach you? Honeymoon spots, Trey said quickly. Too quickly. We were looking at honeymoon spots for you guys. Trying to surprise you. Yeah, Sarah chimed in, her composure returning instantly. Trey found these amazing deals. We wanted to book something special for us. A surprise. And the no cell service part, I pressed, my eyes narrowing. So you can relax. Sarah laughed, walking over and wrapping her arms around my neck. She smelled like expensive perfume and deception. So you stop checking your email for 5 minutes and focus on your new wife. It was going to be romantic. I looked at Trey. He gave me a thumbs up. Just looking out for you, bro. I wanted to believe them. God, I wanted to believe them so badly. The alternative, that my fiancé and my stepbrother were plotting something, was too grotesque to entertain. It was too cliché. It was too painful. So I let it go. I kissed Sarah. I thanked Trey. I went to the kitchen, took 2 Excedrin for my migraine, and went back to work to pay for the honeymoon I apparently wasn't allowed to plan. But the seed was planted. The foundation had a crack, and once you see a crack in the concrete, you can't unsee it. You just wait for the pressure to build until everything comes crashing down. And the pressure was definitely building. In architecture, there's a phenomenon called creep. It's the slow, permanent deformation of a structure under constant stress. It doesn't happen all at once. It's microscopic, a millimeter here, a fracture there. But over time, the entire integrity of the building is compromised. That was me. I was experiencing emotional and financial creep. After the incident with the travel brochures, I tried to double down on being the perfect fiancé. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was overworked. I was projecting my own insecurities onto 2 people who were just trying to be helpful. But the universe has a funny way of trying to save you from yourself, even when you're determined to stay blind. The first major red flag was the bachelor party fund. Trey approached me 6 weeks before the wedding. He came into my home office, a space he usually avoided because it smelled too much like effort, and sat on the edge of my desk. He was wearing a new pair of designer sneakers. I knew they were new because I'd seen the charge from Nordstrom on my statement the day before. Hey, Kenji, we need to talk about the send-off, he said, flashing that crooked grin. The guys and I were thinking Vegas, but not the touristy Vegas. We're talking private villa, high-stakes tables, the real deal. I didn't even look up from my CAD drawings. Trey, I told you, I can't do a week in Vegas. I have the Peterson project deadline. Who said anything about a week? Just a long weekend, he countered. And look, I know things are tight with the wedding costs, so I've been doing some consulting on the side. I've got some of it covered, but I need you to front the deposits for the villa and the jet. You know, since your credit limit is, well, legendary. The jet? I finally looked up. Are you insane? It's a package deal, bro. Sarah really wants this for you. She said you need to let loose. That was the hook. Sarah wants this for you. Whenever they wanted me to do something stupid with my money, they invoked the other person's name like a holy spell. I checked the numbers. The deposit was $12,000. I felt a cold sweat prickle my neck. My savings were beginning to look like a ghost town, but the pressure was relentless. Sarah came in 10 minutes later with a glass of wine for me, rubbing my shoulders. "You deserve it, Kenji," she whispered into my ear. "Trey's worked so hard on this. Don't be the guy who ruins his own bachelor party." I folded. I always folded. I transferred the money. 3 days later, I was at work when I received a notification from my banking app. A charge for $4,500 at a high-end jewelry boutique in downtown Chicago. I called Sarah immediately. "Hey, I just got a notification. Did your car get stolen?" There was a pause. A beat too long. "Oh, no, honey. I had to get the bridesmaid gifts. I told you about this, remember? The Tiffany bracelets? I thought we discussed a budget of $200 per person, Sarah. There are 4 bridesmaids. That's $800, not $4,500. I know, she said, her voice turning into that defensive, high-pitched whine that made my head throb. But the ones I wanted were out of stock, and these were just so much more us. Plus, I got a little something for my mom. And a watch for Trey. As a thank you for all the wedding help. A watch for Trey? On my credit card? Kenji, don't be small-minded, she snapped. He's the best man. It's tradition. Why are you acting like we're broke? You're a partner. Stop hovering over every cent. It's embarrassing. She hung up. I sat in my glass-walled office, staring at the skyline, feeling like the smallest man in the city. The bachelor party weekend arrived. I was supposed to meet Trey and his friends at the private terminal at O'Hare on Friday afternoon. But at 10 a.m., a crisis hit the Peterson site. A structural beam had been misaligned, and if I didn't get down there to supervise the correction, the whole project would be delayed by months. I called Trey. "Hey, I'm stuck at the site. I'm going to miss the flight. You guys go ahead. I'll catch a commercial flight out tonight or tomorrow morning." "Oh, damn, bro." Trey sounded weirdly flustered. "You sure? I mean, the villa is paid for. Maybe you should just stay and work. We don't want you stressed out in Vegas." "I'll be fine, Trey. Just enjoy the jet. I'll text you when I land." I spent 14 hours in the dirt and noise of a construction site. By the time I was done, I was covered in dust, exhausted, and my migraine was back with a vengeance. I decided I couldn't face a flight to Vegas. I just wanted my bed. I didn't call Sarah. I wanted to surprise her. I imagined her, sitting on the couch, maybe feeling a little lonely without me, and I'd walk in and we'd have a quiet, normal night for once. I got home at 1 a.m. The lights in the condo were dim. I dropped my keys on the console and noticed something odd. There were 2 pairs of shoes by the door, Sarah's heels, and a pair of men's loafers, Trey's loafers, the ones I'd bought him for the wedding. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. He's probably just here picking something up, I told myself. Maybe the flight was delayed. I walked toward the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I heard muffled laughter. And then Sarah's voice. "I can't believe he actually fell for the jet thing. He's so desperate to be one of the guys that he didn't even check if the tail number was real." "I told you," Trey's voice. Low, intimate. "He's a mark, Sarah. A high-achieving, socially stunted mark. He thinks if he throws enough money at the world, people will actually like him." "It's almost sad," Sarah sighed. "But God, I need that honeymoon. I already checked the limits on the supplementary cards he gave us. We can live like royalty in Bali for 6 months if we play it right." "6 months?" Trey laughed. "With what he's got stashed in that house fund? We can disappear forever. Let him have his blueprints and his lonely condo. I'll have his wife and his life." I stood in the hallway frozen. The world felt like it was tilting on its axis. I wanted to burst in. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wrap my hands around Trey's neck until that smug laughter stopped. But then, the architect in me took over. If I burst in now, what would happen? They'd lie. They'd gaslight me. Sarah would cry and say it was a joke or that I was misinterpreting a deep conversation about my flaws. Trey would challenge me to a fight. He'd probably win. They'd have time to move the money. They'd have time to hide. No. If a building is structurally unsound, you don't just kick a wall and hope it falls the right way. You perform a controlled demolition. You place the charges exactly where they will do the most damage to the supports, and you wait for the perfect moment to press the button. I turned around. I walked out of the condo as quietly as I'd entered. I went to a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away. I sat in a vinyl booth, ordered a black coffee, and pulled out my laptop. I started with the bank accounts. I'd given Sarah manager access to our joint wedding account. I watched in real time as I scrolled through the history. There were transfers I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, $500, $1,000, sent to an account labeled SM Consulting, SM Sarah Miller. She wasn't just spending my money, she was embezzling it. Then I looked at the bachelor party jet deposit. I tracked the wire transfer. It didn't go to a private aviation company. It went to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. The registered agent? Trey's friend from Miami. They weren't even in Vegas. They were in my home, in my bed, laughing at my expense while I sat in the dirt at a construction site. I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. The pain was there, buried deep under a layer of ice, but on the surface, I was purely analytical. I had 4 weeks until the wedding, 4 weeks to gather every scrap of evidence, 4 weeks to ensure that when I cut them off, there wouldn't be a single penny left for them to grab. 4 weeks to make sure that the Vogue wedding Sarah wanted became a public execution of her reputation. I opened a new spreadsheet. I titled it Project Dissolution. I spent the rest of the night mapping out their lies, every doctor's appointment Sarah had while I was at work, every job interview Trey went to. I cross-referenced their social media posts, their GPS data from the family car I paid for, and the credit card timestamps. It was all there. A map of betrayal so detailed it was almost beautiful in its complexity. As the sun began to rise over Lake Michigan, I closed my laptop. I wasn't the mark anymore. I was the foreman, and I was about to tear this whole house down. I walked back to the apartment at 7 a.m. I found them in the kitchen making coffee. Trey was wearing my silk robe. Sarah was in her yoga gear, looking fresh and innocent. "Kenji," she cried, rushing over to hug me. "You're home. How was the sight? We were so worried you'd be exhausted." "I am," I said, forcing a smile that felt like a scar. "I'm exhausted, but the job is almost done." I looked Trey straight in the eyes. "How was the jet, bro? Was it everything you hoped for?" Trey didn't even blink. Unbelievable, man. "You really missed out. The champagne was top shelf." "I bet it was," I said. "I'll make sure to look at the receipts." I walked past them into my office and locked the door. The demolition had begun. Living with them for those final 4 weeks was like living inside a high-voltage transformer. On the outside, everything looked static and silent, but if you touched the surface, you'd be incinerated. I had to become an Oscar-caliber actor. Every morning, I woke up next to a woman who was actively calculating how to drain my bank accounts, and every evening I shared a drink with a man who was sleeping with my fiancé in the bed I paid for. The psychological toll was immense. I started to understand why buildings fail under sustained vibration. It's not one big hit. It's the constant, rhythmic shaking that liquefies the soil underneath. I hired a private investigator on the second day of my awakening. His name was Miller, a retired CPD detective who specialized in domestic disputes. I didn't want a domestic dispute. I wanted a forensic autopsy. "I need everything, Miller," I told him, in a dimly lit coffee shop far from my office. "Every hotel stay, every dinner, every penny they move. And I want high-definition video. I don't care if it's in a car, an elevator, or my own damn living room." Miller leaned back, looking at the folders I'd already compiled. "You've done half the work for me, kid. You architects really are meticulous. But why keep the wedding on? You've got enough here to dump her and sue for the embezzlement, because a lawsuit is quiet." I replied, staring at my reflection in the dark coffee. A lawsuit happens in a sterile courtroom with 3 lawyers and a tired judge. I'm an architect. I don't just want them gone. I want their entire world to collapse in a way that can never be rebuilt. The first week of the PI surveillance brought back the expected. Lunches at expensive bistros where Trey would pay with the supplementary credit card I'd given Sarah for when emergencies. They weren't even hiding it well. They felt invincible. They thought I was so buried in my blueprints that I'd never notice a $500 charge for a floral consultation that actually took place at a boutique hotel bar. But it was the second week when the true breaking point arrived. I was at my desk at the firm, trying to focus on a skyscraper's wind load calculations, when Miller sent me a link to a private cloud folder. New footage, the text read. You're going to want to sit down for this. It's not just the cheating. I opened the folder. It was a video from a hidden camera Miller had planted in the condo while they were out at yoga. I watched as Sarah and Trey entered the living room. They were laughing. Trey holding a bottle of my 20-year-old scotch. They sat at my dining table, the one I'd imported from Japan. They didn't start making out. They started working. Sarah opened her laptop and Trey pulled a stack of documents from his bag. Okay, Sarah said, her voice sharp and professional. I've got the power of attorney forms. If we get him to sign these among the pre-wedding insurance paperwork, I can authorize the transfer of the 401k into the SM Consulting account before we even leave for the airport. What about the firm? Trey asked, leaning over her. The partnership share is the big prize. That's trickier, Sarah replied, biting her lip. But I've been talking to his mom. I've convinced her that Kenji is burned out and depressed. I told her we're planning an intervention after the honeymoon to get him to sell his shares and move to something lower stress. If she supports it, he'll do it. He's a mama's boy at heart. Trey chuckled, kissing her neck. You're a genius. Poor Kenji. He thinks he's building a life, and he's really just building our retirement fund. Do you think he'll actually kill himself when he finds out? I mean, he's so fragile. Sarah laughed. A cold, tinkling sound that I used to think was beautiful. Who cares, as long as the check's clear? Honestly, Trey, I don't know how I lasted 3 years with him. He's so dry. Talking to him is like reading a manual for a dishwasher. I closed the laptop. My vision went white. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the infidelity. They were weaponizing my mother. They were planning to gaslight me into thinking I was mentally unstable so they could strip mine my professional life. They weren't just thieves. They were predators. They were looking at my life as a carcass to be picked clean. That night, I went home, and Sarah was waiting for me with a peace offering dinner. She'd ordered my favorite Italian. You look so tired, honey, she said, stroking my hair as I sat down. You're working too hard. Maybe after the wedding, you should think about taking a sabbatical. Just a few months. My friend has a connection to a wellness retreat in Sedona. I looked at her. I looked at the eyes I used to adore, now seeing only the cold calculation behind the iris. A sabbatical, I repeated, my voice hollow. Maybe you're right, Sarah. Maybe I should just let go of everything. Exactly, she beamed, sitting in my lap. Just trust me. I have everything handled. I'm going to take such good care of you. I felt her skin against mine, and I wanted to scream until my lungs gave out. I wanted to flip the table and roar. But I didn't. I did something harder. I smiled back. I know you well, I said. I'm counting on it. That was the night the Kenji they knew died. The Kenji who wanted a family, who believed in the inherent goodness of people, who thought that if he worked hard enough, he'd be loved. I went into my office and called my lawyer, not the firm's lawyer, a pit bull of a divorce, an estate attorney I knew from a previous project. I need an annulment package ready for the morning after the wedding date, I told him, and I need a civil suit for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. But more importantly, I need to protect my mother's assets. They're targeting her too. We can do that, the lawyer said. But Kenji, if you have all this, why wait? Cancel the venue. You'll save at least $60,000 on the final payments. I looked at the floor plan of the steakhouse where the rehearsal dinner was to be held. I looked at the seating chart. No, I said. The 60 grand is the price of admission for the show I'm about to put on. I want them to feel the highest high they've ever felt. I want them to be seconds away from the finish line, tasting the champagne, smelling the money, and then I'm going to pull the earth out from under them. The final 2 weeks were a blur of, yes, dear, and of course, Trey. I signed the insurance papers they gave me, but I'd already had my lawyer swap the pages for documents that looked identical but were actually legally binding confessions of debt to my estate, disguised as trust agreements. They were so blinded by their own greed that they didn't even read the fine print. They just saw a signature and thought they'd won. I watched Trey buy a suitcase for the honeymoon. I watched Sarah pick out a going-away outfit. Every time they smiled at me, I imagined the look on their faces when the video started playing. Every time they helped me with a task, I added a new line to my spreadsheet of their destruction. I was no longer an architect of buildings. I was an architect of a catastrophe. The day before the rehearsal dinner, Miller delivered the final piece of the puzzle, a recording of them in the honeymoon suite I prepaid for. They were discussing which of my watches Trey should take and which ones they should lose to file an insurance claim. Tomorrow is the night, Trey had said in the recording, raising a glass of my whiskey. To Kenji, the best thing that ever happened to our bank accounts. I watched that clip 10 times. I burned the image into my brain. I wanted to make sure that when I stood up at that dinner, I wouldn't have a single shred of mercy left in my soul. I didn't. By the time I was putting on my charcoal suit for the rehearsal dinner, I felt like a machine. I was calibrated. I was ready. The charges were set. The wires were run. The foundation was gone. All that was left was to push the button. Execution is everything. In my line of work, a brilliant design means nothing if the contractor cuts corners on the site. I couldn't afford a single corner to be cut. For the 24 hours leading up to the rehearsal dinner, I operated with a surgical precision that would have terrified the old Kenji. The man who used to worry about whether the invitations were the right shade of eggshell was gone. In his place was a technician of cold, hard revenge. The first step was the financial extraction. I had to move before they did, but I couldn't trigger any alerts. Sarah was checking the joint accounts daily, like a vulture circling a dying animal. If she saw a sudden mass withdrawal, she'd bolt. I called my private banker, a man who had handled my firm's accounts for years and knew my father before he passed. I sat in his mahogany-paneled office at 8 a.m. on the day of the dinner. I need to liquidate the house fund and move it into a blind trust, I told him. And I need the supplementary cards issued to Sarah Miller and Trey Vance frozen, but not until 7 p.m. tonight. I want them to think they have access until the very moment the dinner starts. Kenji, this is a massive move, he said, adjusting his glasses. The tax implications alone, I don't care about the taxes, I interrupted. I care about the oxygen. I want to suck the air out of their lungs. Also, I need you to reverse the wire transfer for the honeymoon jet. Here's the evidence of the Shell Corporation fraud. If the bank initiates a fraud clawback now, the account Trey's friend set up will be flagged by the feds before they can even try to withdraw the cash. Next came the legal trap. My attorney had finished the annulment and restitution packets. They were masterpieces of litigation, because I had caught them conspiring to commit grand larceny and corporate fraud targeting my firm's shares. We weren't just looking at a broken engagement. We were looking at criminal charges. But I didn't want the police to take them away in the middle of the night. That was too clean. I wanted the social death first. I spent the afternoon at the steakhouse. I'd told Sarah I was handling the final walkthrough, so she could spend the day at the spa with her mother. In reality, I was meeting with the venue's AV technician. The slideshow, I said, handing him a high-speed flash drive. You have the love story video Sarah sent you, right? Yes, Mr. Sato. It's queued up for after the main course. Change of plans, I said, sliding a $500 bill across the table. I want you to keep the file name the same, Kenji and Sarah Love Story.mp4, but I want you to replace the content with what's on this drive, and I need you to ensure the volume is set to maximum. No matter what happens, once it starts, It doesn't stop until the very end. Do you understand? The tech, a young guy with a nose ring, looked at the drive, then at my face. He must have seen something in my eyes, the look of a man who had already burned his bridges and was now just enjoying the warmth of the fire. He nodded slowly. Got it. Maximum volume. No stopping. The drive didn't just contain the PI's footage of them in bed. That would have been too trashy talk show. I had edited it into a documentary of their greed. It started with the bank statements. It showed the side-by-side comparison of my credit card bills and the photos of Sarah and Trey at the jewelry store and the hotels. It had the audio of them laughing about my dishwasher manual personality. It had the video of them discussing my mother's intervention. I called it The Cost of Family. By 4 p.m., I was at my mother's house. This was the hardest part. I had to undo the poison Sarah had been dripping into her ear. I sat with her in her garden, holding her hand. Mom, I need you to trust me, I said. Sarah and Trey have been lying to me and to you. They told you I was depressed because they wanted you to help them sell my shares in the firm. My mother looked at me, her eyes filling with confusion and then a sharp protective anger. I thought, she seemed so concerned for you, Kenji. She said you were crying at night. I wasn't crying, Mom. I was working to pay for her crimes. Tonight, I'm going to end it. I need you to stay strong at the dinner. Whatever you see on the screen, just know that your son is finally safe. She squeezed my hand, her face hardening into the expression of the woman who had survived a bitter divorce and raised a successful man on her own. Do what you have to do, Kenji. Asato doesn't let a wolf sleep in the house. The final piece of the plan was the gifts. I went to an office supply store and bought 20 high-quality manila envelopes. In each one, I placed a 3-page document. Page 1, a summary of the fraud committed against me. Page 2, a copy of the lawsuit I was filing the next morning. Page 3, an itemized bill for every dinner, every clothing item, and every emergency I had paid for on their behalf over the last year, with a note stating that a formal demand for payment would follow from my legal counsel. I labeled each envelope with the guest's name. For Sarah's parents, I included the transcripts of Sarah talking about how stuffy and embarrassing their little suburban house was, and how she couldn't wait to move them into a cheap nursing home once she had my money. I was burning everything. I wasn't just taking my life back. I was scorched earthing their entire social support system. At 6:30 p.m., I arrived back at the condo. Sarah was getting dressed. She looked stunning in that ivory silk dress. The light caught the diamond ring I'd spent 40 grand on, the ring I'd already reported as stolen or lost to my insurance company an hour prior, effectively making it a piece of hot property. You look beautiful, I said, standing in the doorway. Thanks, baby, she said, checking her makeup in the mirror. Are you ready? Trey is already at the restaurant. He said he's going to make sure the bar is stocked with your favorite scotch. I'm sure he is, I said. Trey is always looking out for me. As we walked out of the apartment, I didn't look back. I knew I'd never sleep there again. I'd already had a moving crew scheduled to arrive at 8 a.m. the next morning to strip the place bare while Sarah and Trey were presumably nursing their hangovers and realization of total ruin. We got into the black car I'd hired. As we drove through the rainy streets of Chicago, Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder. We did it, Kenji, she whispered. Tomorrow, everything changes. No more stress. Just us. You're right, Sarah, I said, looking out at the city lights. Everything changes tonight. The car pulled up to the steakhouse. The valet opened the door. I stepped out, adjusted my cuffs, and felt the weight of the flash drive in my pocket. It was time to stop being the architect. It was time to be the wrecking ball. The private dining room was a tomb of mahogany and heavy velvet drapes. The air smelled of expensive ribeye, red wine, and the kind of suffocating entitlement that only 20 people convinced of their own social superiority can generate. At the center of it all sat Sarah and Trey, positioned like royalty at the head of the long table. I sat at the opposite end. The distance was intentional. The first 45 minutes were a masterclass in irony. I watched Trey order the most expensive bottle of Napa Cabernet on the menu, 3 bottles actually, on my tab. I watched Sarah charm my mother's friends, leaning in, touching their hands, playing the role of the devoted daughter-in-law. Every time she laughed, I felt a pulse of electricity in my fingertips. I was counting down the seconds. All right, everyone, quiet down. It was Sarah's father, Arthur. He stood up, clinking his glass. He was a decent man, if a bit weak-willed, and I almost felt a flicker of pity for what I was about to do to his family name. Almost. I just want to say how proud we are, Arthur began, his voice thick with emotion. Kenji, you've been a rock for our Sarah. And Trey, seeing you two brothers come together like this, it's what family is all about. To the happy couple! To the happy couple, the room echoed. I didn't drink. I just stood up. Thank you, Arthur, I said, my voice cutting through the warmth of the room like a sheet of ice. That was a beautiful sentiment. Trust, family, unity. I walked slowly around the table. I felt every eye on me. Sarah was smiling, but it was the small, tight smile she used when she wanted me to hurry up so she could get back to the center of attention. You know, I continued, stopping behind Trey. I rested my hands on the back of his chair. I've spent my whole life building things, structures that are meant to last, but lately I've realized that I neglected the most important structure of all, my own home. I looked at the AV tech in the corner. I gave a single sharp nod. Sarah, honey, you told me you wanted a Vogue wedding, I said, looking at her. The lights in the room began to dim. You wanted a story people would never forget. Well, I think it's time we showed everyone the real love story that's been happening under this roof. The massive 80-inch 4K monitor at the end of the room hummed to life. The first image wasn't a photo of us. It was a high-resolution scan of a bank statement. A red circle highlighted a $5,000 transfer from my business account to SM Consulting. Kenji, what is this? Sarah asked, her voice dropping an octave. She tried to stand up, but I put a hand on her shoulder. Sit down, Sarah. We're just getting to the good part. The video cut. It was the hidden camera footage from the living room. The sound was crystal clear, piped through the steakhouse's premium Bose system. He's a mark, Sarah. A high-achieving, socially stunted mark. Trey's voice filled the room, loud and mocking. The gasps were audible. My mother's fork hit her plate with a deafening clang. Talking to him is like reading a manual for a dishwasher. Sarah's voice followed, accompanied by her tinkling, cruel laugh. This screen shifted to the footage Miller had caught in the hotel room. The two of them, in robes, drinking my scotch, tossing my gold Rolex back and forth like a toy. Then, the kicker, the audio of them discussing the intervention. For my mother and the plan to steal my firm's shares. Turn it off, Trey roared, lunging toward the AV booth. But I'd planned for that. 2 of my firm's security contractors, men I'd hired for event logistics, stepped out from the shadows near the door. They didn't hit him. They just stood in his way, 2 solid walls of muscle. Sit down, Trey, I said. The sheer coldness in my voice stopped him in his tracks. The video reached its crescendo, a montage of their consultation lunches, the fake jet documents, and finally, a slow-motion shot of them kissing in the elevator of our building while I was at the Peterson site. The lights came back up. The silence was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a building collapses, before the dust starts to settle. Sarah was vibrating. She wasn't crying. She was shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. Kenji, you can't do this. This is private. This is illegal. Actually, Sarah, I said, reaching into my jacket and pulling out the first manila envelope. Recording in my own primary residence where I am a legal resident is perfectly legal in this state under these circumstances. But what is illegal is the 10 counts of wire fraud and embezzlement I'm currently filing against you. I dropped the envelope in front of her. What's this? She hissed. That's your bill, I said, and your lawsuit, and a copy of the annulment papers. Since the marriage hasn't happened, I don't need a divorce. I'm simply erasing the fact that you ever existed in my life. I began walking around the table, handing out the rest of the envelopes to the guests. Arthur, Mrs. Miller, I said, placing an envelope between them. Sarah's mother was already sobbing into her napkin. In there, you'll find the recordings of your daughter explaining how she planned to dump you in a state-run facility once she had my money. I thought you should know who you're defending. I turned to Trey. He looked like he wanted to kill me, but he was pinned by the gaze of the security guards. And Trey, my best man, I smiled. It was the first real smile I'd had in months. I checked that shell corporation in Delaware. Turns out, your friend isn't as loyal as you thought. He took a plea deal from my lawyer 10 minutes ago. He's turning over the bank records for the jet fraud. You aren't just broke, Trey. You're a felon. You think you're so smart. Trey spat, his face purple. You're still the same boring loser. You're going to be alone in that big empty apartment while you what, Trey? I interrupted. You have no money. I froze the cards 3 hours ago. I've already contacted the landlord. Your name was never on the lease, so you're being trespassed as we speak. Your luggage, it's currently sitting on the sidewalk in front of the Salvation Army. I didn't even bother to lock the suitcases. Sarah finally found her voice. It was a shriek. Kenji, please. It was a mistake. He manipulated me. I love you. She reached for my hand, her face a mask of disparate practiced sorrow. I pulled back as if she were a leper. The architect in me loves a good renovation, Sarah, I said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. But some structures are just too rotten to save. You don't renovate a swamp, you drain it. I looked at my mother. She stood up, her face pale but her eyes bright with steel. She walked over to me, took my arm, and ignored Sarah entirely. Let's go, Kenji, she said. This room smells of garbage. Wait, Arthur yelled, his voice cracking. Who's paying for the dinner? The bill it's merely $20,000. I stopped at the door. I looked back at the table, at the half-eaten steaks, the expensive wine, and the two predators who were finally realizing they were the prey. Trey is the best man, I said, echoing Sarah's own words from weeks ago. He's family, and family is everything, right? I'm sure he's got it handled. I walked out. The last thing I heard before the heavy mahogany door swung shut was the sound of Arthur screaming at his daughter and the manager of the steakhouse approaching Trey with a very, very long piece of paper. I stepped out into the Chicago night. The rain had stopped. The air felt thin, sharp, and perfectly clear. For the first time in 3 years, I could finally breathe. In my profession, after a building is demolished, there is a period of site clearing. You have to haul away the twisted rebar, the broken glass, and the pulverized concrete before you can even think about what comes next. You have to ensure the ground is stable. You have to mitigate the dust. The clearing of Sarah and Trey from my life was a messy, loud, and expensive process, but watching them be hauled away like debris was the most satisfying project I've ever managed. The night of the rehearsal dinner was just the beginning. While they were trapped at that steakhouse, Trey eventually being escorted out by police for theft of services when he couldn't produce a working credit card for the $20,000 bill, my team was already at work. By the time Sarah and Trey hitched a ride back to the condo in a friend's car, a friend who likely only gave them a lift to witness the train wreck, they found the locks changed. I had hired a 24-hour locksmith and a private security guard. Their belongings weren't just outside. I had been precise. Sarah's designer bags, the ones bought with my money, were donated to a local women's shelter that very evening, with the tax receipts filed in my name. Trey's expensive sneakers and my borrowed silk robes, as I told them, they were dropped off at the Salvation Army in a neighborhood that didn't take kindly to outsiders in charcoal Armani suits. The legal fallout was a slow-motion car crash that they couldn't look away from, because I had the signatures on those insurance documents, which were actually notarized acknowledgments of debt. Sarah was legally on the hook for every cent she had skimmed from the SM Consulting account. My lawyer was relentless. We didn't just want the money back. We wanted the precedent. We sued for civil conspiracy, fraud, and emotional distress. Sarah tried to fight it at first. She called me from a burner phone, sobbing, telling me she was homeless. and sleeping on her parents' couch in the guest room they had planned to move out of. "Kenji, please," she wailed. "My dad won't even look at me. My mom is on tranquilizers. You've destroyed my family." "No, Sarah," I said, sitting on the balcony of my new office, looking at the blueprints for a museum in Tokyo. "You destroyed your family. I just provided the mirror so they could see what you'd become. Don't call this number again. Any further communication will be considered harassment and added to the civil suit." I hung up and blocked the number. It was the last time I ever heard her voice. Trey's fate was even more poetic. The Delaware Shell Corporation investigation gained traction. Since he had used my bank's interstate wires to move the jet deposit, the FBI took a cursory interest in the wire fraud. It wasn't enough to send him to federal prison for 20 years, but it was enough to ensure he had a felony record. The charismatic athlete was now a convicted fraudster with a mountain of legal debt and zero credit. Last I heard, he was working at a car wash in Florida, living in a trailer, and still trying to convince people he was just about to hit it big. As for the Vogue wedding, it became a legend in Chicago social circles. For months, people whispered about the architect's revenge. Some called me cruel. Most called me a hero. But the only opinion that mattered was my mother's. She and I took that honeymoon trip together. Not to the Maldives. I didn't want any memories of their brochures, but to a quiet, traditional ryokan in the mountains of Kyoto. We sat in the hot springs, surrounded by the smell of cedar and the sound of falling water. "You look different, Kenji," she said one evening over tea. "Your shoulders, they aren't around your ears anymore." "I learned something, Mom," I said. "I used to think that if I designed a perfect enough life, nothing could break it. I thought stability was something you bought or built. But it's not. What is it then? It's knowing when to walk away from a bad foundation," I said, "and having the courage to be the one who pushes the button." I didn't rush back into dating. I spent a year being dry and boring, and I loved every second of it. I focused on my firm. We won the bid for the Tokyo project. I moved there for 6 months to oversee the start of construction. In Tokyo, I met a woman named Hana. She's a structural engineer. The first time we met, we spent 4 hours arguing about the seismic dampers on a bridge project. There were no flowers, no Vogue aesthetics, and she certainly didn't care about my bank account. She made more than I did. One night, while we were looking over some calculations, she looked at me and said, "You're very meticulous, Kenji. You look at every bolt twice." "Who hurt you enough to make you this careful?" I laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was light. "A couple of amateur demolition experts," I said. "But they did me a favor. They taught me that you can't build something beautiful on a lie. You have to clear the site completely." I still have the manila envelope from that night in my safe. Not the one with the photos, I burned those, but the itemized bill I gave to Trey. It's a reminder. Sometimes the most important thing an architect can do isn't to build a house. It's to recognize when the house is a prison and to ensure that when the walls come down, you're the one holding the keys to the exit. I'm no longer the mark. I'm the man who stands on solid ground, and let me tell you, the view from here is incredible.